I'm Adam. And I'm Pim. And this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way. Hey Pim, has there ever been a time when you weren't happy about something and had to say something?
That's a pretty vague statement. A time where I said something about something.
You know, if you see something that you just thought was wrong and you wanted to speak out against it.
There was a time at school when they had bananas at lunch.
Were you offended because you're a chimpanzee?
No, that'd be a silly thing to be upset about.
It isn't offensive to offer bananas to chimps?
No, they really are my favorite food.
So what was wrong?
There was just a big pile of bananas, and the last folks to go through the line never got any.
So what'd you do?
I suggested that everyone get one, which they did. Then everyone was happy.
Good work. In today's book, Fannie Lou Hamer uses her voice to stand up for civil rights. Let's get started. Voice of Freedom, Fannie Lou Hamer, Spirit of the Civil Rights Movement by Carole Boston Weatherford, illustrated by Ekua Holmes. The truest thing that we have in this country at this time is little children. If they think you've made a mistake, kids speak out. Fannie Lou Hamer. Sunflower County, Mississippi. Minister Malcolm X once called me the country's #1 freedom-fighting woman, but nothing about my beginnings would make you think anyone beyond these parts would ever hear my name. Mississippi. I was born here, the youngest of 20 children. My folks, James and Luella Townsend, was sharecroppers in Sunflower County in the Delta, where the soil was as rich as black folks were poor, where cotton was king and Jim Crow the law. When I was born, on October 6, 1917, the plantation owner paid my mother $50 for producing a future field hand. The money helped my family through the winter. Chile, I am proof that the Delta birthed the blues. Delta Blues. I was just 6 when I dragged my first bag down a row of cotton. My family, all 22 of us, worked in the field. Wasn't no other work to do. They didn't have no such things as factories. These factories are something new. From sunup to sundown, dew to dark. Can seed to cant, 20-foot sacks over our shoulders down miles of rows. We bent to pluck the cotton blossoming out, as 100-degree heat beat our backs and the dried bristle cut our knuckles and wrists. We picked 15 tons of cotton a season, but couldn't get ahead for our lives. You see, the scale was always tipped in the owner's favor. Our so-called share of the crop never be enough to pay back the money we borrowed from the owner for seed, food, clothing, and supplies. Same sorry situation every season. Black people work so hard and we ain't got nothing to show for it. I told anyone who would listen. Sharecropping was just slavery by a gentler name. The same folks still had us in chains. Spoiled. I was the baby and my mother never let anyone in the family forget it. She told my father not to beat me, and she made my sisters and brothers give me piggyback rides, even though I weighed more than some of them. I could get into some mischief too, like the time I cooked a bag of rice, it boiled over and made a big mess. My father was so angry that I ran off to get away from him. My mother saved me from beating that time too. My father wasn't always serious though. After a long day in the field, he had told jokes. We roasted peanuts and all sang together. Sometimes they'd stand me on the kitchen table and I would break into "This Little Light of Mine." I reckon I was a show-off. My mother taught me. A strong woman, my mother wore rags patched with rags so her children could look decent. Even as a girl, I knew things weren't right. Whites had food, clothes, everything, while blacks worked and went hungry. One day I asked, why wasn't I white so that we could have some food? Don't feel like that, my mother said. We're not bad because we're black people. Next thing I knew, she had bought me a black doll. Told me, I want you to respect yourself as a black child. And as you get older, you respect yourself as a black woman. If you respect yourself enough, other people will have to respect you. My mother taught me years ago that black is beautiful. Fair. School was open 4 months, December through March, when children were not needed to tend cotton. I liked school even if black history was left out and the textbook made blacks seem like fools. I recited poetry and won many a spelling bee. Fair. May I have a definition? Free of bias, dishonest, and injustice. Fair. F-A-I-R. Fair. I sang too up through 6th grade, and then left to work full-time in the field. My family needed every hand if we were ever to break even. At 13 years old, I picked 300 pounds a week, but I missed my school books. I gathered newspaper scraps along the roadside and magazines from plantation's trash just to have something, anything to read. I was so hungry to learn. My mother drilled this into me. When you read, she said, you know, and you can help yourself and others. Not much food and rarely meat on our table. Often greens with gravy or onions with bread or cornmeal. Neighbors gave my mother chitlins, pig's feet, and hog heads for helping with the slaughter. Our beds were cotton sacks stuffed with corn shucks and grass. We had no electricity, heat, or plumbing, and no money for a doctor to look at whatever causing this limp or to save my mother's sight when a wood chip hit her eye. Once my father managed to buy a wagon, plow, 3 mules, Ella, Bird, and Henry. The 2 cows, Mullen and Della. But a white neighbor poisoned the livestock. Just couldn't stand to see black people getting ahead. They knocked us right back down to doggone, dirt poor, doing without. My parents never did get a chance to get up again. I sure did miss Della's milk. Not everyone could move up north. Hardship after hardship wore my father down. By the time I was 22, we had buried him. Most of my brothers and sisters moved up north, hoping for a higher pay and better life. I can't blame them. Jim Crow chokes every chance a black man gets down here. Who wouldn't long for something better? I might have gone too, but my mother needed care. I couldn't bear the thought of her in some nursing home. She was in her 80s, nearly blind, and worn down by hard work when she moved in with me. Sometimes I read to her, other times I'd hear her singing. Songs that would really sink down in me, powerful message songs. I never regretted staying behind. Not a single minute, not a single note. Worse off than dogs. I married Perry Hamer. Pap, as he's known. A good man, a few words, steady as a rock. My last name changed, but little else. I joined Pap on the Marlowe plantation where he drove a tractor. I just picked down different rows. I canned produce. Pap shot rabbits and squirrels, and we caught catfish and perch. On the side, we ran my father's old juke joint and sold bootleg liquor. We never went hungry, but we were still poor. We couldn't stand that Marlowe's dog, Old Honey, had its own indoor bathroom, while me and Pap used an outhouse because our toilet stayed broken. The owner wouldn't fix it, said we didn't need it. Beside picking cotton, I was the timekeeper. I tracked hours working bales picked and pay owed. But the boss fixed the scales to cheat us sharecroppers. When I could, I used my own skill to set things right. When I couldn't, the lie weighed on me heavily. That's a sad thing to see. People treated worse than pets. It just goes to show that, sadly, there were times when the color of your skin determined the life that you were going to live. It's like people found a loophole to continue slavery. No matter how bad things are, it's difficult to change people's perspective so quickly. So what you're saying is that even though the laws changed, it didn't change how people thought. Not until people like Fannie Lou Hamer started talking out. Motherhood. In 1954, me and Pap adopted 2 little girls. I sang spirituals to Dorothy Jean and Virgie Ree, just like my mother had done to me. In 1961, a doctor tricked me into an operation supposed to remove a growth. I awoke from the surgery to find that the doctor's knife cut more than a small tumor. He had removed the parts that God gave me to bring children into the world. I would never have babies of my own. A Mississippi law at the time said poor folks had no business making babies. That law may have taken my womb, but no one was going to take my voice. Literacy test. In 1962, my friend Mary Tucker told me about a meeting at William Chapel Church. 4 young men from out of town was pushing voter registration. Not a soul sitting in the pews had ever cast a ballot. Till then, I didn't even know that blacks could vote. When the people could get out of the fields, if they had a radio, they'd be too tired to play it, so we didn't know what was going on in the rest of the state, even much less in other places. But my hand flew up when the men asked for volunteers to go to the country courthouse and register. In all, 18 of us signed up for the trip. I was just curious to go, so I did. I guess if I'd had any sense, I'd have been a little scared, but what was the point of being scared? The only thing they could do to me was kill me, and it seemed like they'd been trying to do that a little bit at a time ever since I could remember. A old rented bus drove us 30 miles to Indianola, what was the home of the violent white citizens council. Barking dogs and rifle-toting men met our bus. That was supposed to scare us. The circuit clerk only let 2 people in the courthouse at a time. I went first. I didn't know what to expect. I had to give my name and workplace, and then read, copy, and explain parts of the Mississippi Constitution. I didn't know nothing about the law. No wonder I flunked that test. Now, at least I knew that voting was my right. On the move. On the ride home, a policeman stopped our bus to arrest the driver on account of the yellow bus looked too much like a school bus, a phony charge if I ever heard one. We emptied our pockets, scraped together $30 toward the bogus fine. Back at the plantation, my boss had already set my stuff in the road. Said they wasn't ready for that in Mississippi. He gave me a choice, withdraw my name at the courthouse or move on. All I could say was, I didn't go down there to register for you, I was down there to register for myself. Later that night, I left my home and family to move in with the Tuckers. But before long, night riders came around. They shot in the house 16 times thinking that I was there. I couldn't risk the Tuckers' lives. For 2 months, I moved from place to place, hiding out with friends and family. Then I rented a house in town near my family. As soon as I moved in, I marched back into that courthouse and retook the test. What did I have to lose? There was nothing they could do to me. They couldn't fire me because I didn't have a job. They couldn't put me out of my house because I didn't have one. There was nothing they could take from me any longer. A month later, I heard that I had passed. The price of freedom. Before I could cast a single vote, I had to pay a toll tax I couldn't afford and dodge the night riders who cruised slow as molasses past my house with guns after my name was printed in the paper. Too bad a voter registration card couldn't pay the rent. When Pap lost his job, we got by on $10 a week raised by those young voting rights workers who opened my eyes to the change a-coming. I hopped aboard that train. SNCC. Snick. Those young folks was something else. Most belonged to Snick, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That was called Snick for its initials. The college kids saw me for a leader. I made it plain why I joined the movement. All my life I've been sick and tired. Now I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired. I toured the South with many words from my heart and spirituals I learned from my mother's knee. I fired up many a rally. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. Let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. But I wasn't singing for show. I was singing for freedom. Leadership came natural to me as singing. People took to calling me the spirit of the civil rights movement. The beating. In June 1963, I went to citizenship school in South Carolina. On the way back, the bus had stopped in Columbus, Mississippi. Me and the other trainees was hungry and decided to try and eat in the terminal. We ordered breakfast at the whites-only lunch counter, knowing segregation had been outlawed. After a long wait, we was finally served. But the bus driver called the police, and down the road in Winona, we got kicked off the bus and thrown in jail. When I asked what was the charges, the police told me to shut up. They put us in separate cells and made other prisoners beat us, black and blue. They just kept beating me, the jailers telling me, "You nigger bitch, we're gonna make you wish you were dead." Through the pain, I quoted scripture. One prisoner beat me till we were both exhausted. Then the other took over. I waited 3 days for the doctor to show up. Snick sent someone to bail us out, but the police locked him up and beat him too. It took Andrew Young from the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to get us released. The same day, NAACP leader Medgar Evers was slain in his driveway for teaching black people their rights. The others said it was my singing that brought them through. That November, John F. Kennedy was killed and Lyndon B. Johnson was sworn in as president. He promised Dr. King to finish what Kennedy couldn't. In July 1964, Johnson signed the Civil Rights Bill into law. The blood of freedom fighters was in his pen. Injustice. The federal government filed charges against the Winona police. I testified at the trial, but the all-white jury sided with the police. The beating left me more than just bruises and bad memories. A blood clot weakened my eyesight, my kidneys were damaged, and my limp got worse. But I was determined. I was marching toward the promised land. Running. Not even a bad leg could stop me from standing up for what I believed in. Hard as we have to work for nothing, there must be some way we can change things. There must be something else. There was. Becoming a lawmaker myself. The next year, I ran for Congress in the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party. Death threats started to come at me as soon as I announced I was running. But I didn't scare easy. I meant to prove that anyone, black or white, rich or poor, could get involved in American politics. I cast my first vote for myself. Freedom Summer. Later that year, I shared stories and songs with students and volunteers about what it was like for black folks in the Delta. After the training, the students set off in a campaign called Freedom Summer. Some be running freedom schools, teaching reading and the right to vote. The Ku Klux Klan killed some of them students. I knew Michaels Schwerner and James Chaney real well. They were murdering along with Andrew Goodman for nosing into church firebombings. If I had known that those young men would wind up dead, I would have told them to stay home. I cried like I lost my own sons. I could take losing the election, but not this. Still, I had to go on. At a government hearing in Washington, D.C., I spoke about my struggles and how we started a new political party in Mississippi because the regular Democratic locked us out. We weren't going to be locked out no more.
I am glad that I never lived in a time where it was so dangerous to stand up for basic human rights.
Imagine the amount of courage that it took to stand up and be a voice that's heard against these wrongs.
And not just standing up for yourself, but for all those around you that may be too scared to stand up for themselves.
Someone once told me that there are 3 types of people in the world: the good, the bad, and the followers.
Okay.
Most people are followers. They do what they're told and follow the rules.
Sure.
So if good people don't stand up and become leaders, voicing wrongs, then people will follow rules that are bad.
So instead of being a follower, you have to decide if you want to be on the side of good or bad.
Exactly. 1964 Democratic National Convention, Atlantic City, New Jersey. I was vice chairman of the new Mississippi Democratic Freedom Party. That August, we sent a delegation to the Democratic Party's National Convention. We went to make a case that the regular Democrats from Mississippi was unlawful because they did not represent black people. We went to demand a seat at the table, a voice in our democracy. But we had not bargained in dirty deals dreamed up to shut us down. President Lyndon Johnson called a press conference just to get the cameras off me when I spoke before the Credentials Committee. His trick backfired. The TV networks taped me and ran my statement during prime time, when the most people be watching. If the Freedom Democratic Party is not seated now, I said, I question America. Is this America, the land of the free and the home of the brave? We stole the president's thunder, and our support swelled like a storm cloud. Johnson was scared we would cost him Southern support and the nomination. He sent Hubert Humphrey, a pro-civil rights senator from Minnesota, who wanted to be on the ticket as vice president. Johnson ordered Humphrey to stop us. Humphrey met with me, Dr. King, and our party's lawyer. The lawyer told us we should give in to get Humphrey elected. After I said that our cause was larger than one man, they didn't let me come to no more meetings. They struck a deal without me. We would get 2 at-large delegates. The rest of us would be honored guests and just sit and watch, not vote. We had not come 900 miles for 2 seats. I threatened to slit our chairman's throat if he took the deal. He turned it down. At least state delegations could no longer get away with barring blacks. Africa. I can't believe how far fame took me, all the way to Guinea with singer Harry Belafonte. When our pilot on the flight from Ghana was black, I knew I was in for an awakening. What little we had read about Africa was just wild. At the time, Guinea had just gotten independence from France. I was so proud that black people was running the government. I had never even seen black people running banks. I was sort of sad that I was treated better in Guinea than in my own country. I cried when I saw boiled green peanuts, like we eat in Mississippi, and when I heard the same tunes that my grandmother had sung, only with different words. So many things reminded me of home. My ancestors spoke to me. I wondered, could some folks I met be my distant kin? I was angry that slavery cut the ties. Washington. Back home, I ran for Congress again as a Freedom Democrat, not to win the election, but to prove that the election needed to be thrown out and that the white congressman should not be seated. Why? Because I had been barred from the regular Democratic ticket and the state had blocked so many blacks from voting. Ann Devine, Victoria Adams, and I took that fighting to Congress. We won more support than expected, but not as much as we needed. Annie, Victoria, and I was right there when the decision was read. We were the first black women ever to sit in Congress on the House floor. But the history-making didn't go to my head. In 1965, I went back to my grassroots work, suing Sunflower County for blocking black voter registration and marching with Dr. King in Alabama and Mississippi. We registered thousands of new black voters in spite of police beatings so bad that Congress was shamed into passing the Vote Writing Act. Black Power. Say it loud, I'm black and proud. James Brown. Black Power had become the battle cry of the movement. For me, that meant pride and equal rights. But for Stokely Carmichael, the new head of Snick, it meant fighting if need be, and it meant having an all-black staff. Hurt my heart to lose Bob Zellner and the other white workers so committed for so long. How could I hate? I mourned whites who died for freedom. I have lived long enough to know that no race has a corner on decency. I feel sorry for anybody that could let hate wrap them up. Ain't no such thing as I can't hate anybody. And hope to see God's face. Out of one blood, God made all nations. America's Problem. On my fundraising tour, I called racism America's problem. Whatever you give, I told the crowd, it's not only to free me in Mississippi, but it's also to free yourselves, because no man is an island. Racists can't be some kind of rats, though. In 1967, my daughter Dorothy took sick after her second child was born. I drove more than 90 miles all the way to Memphis, Tennessee to find a hospital would treat blacks. Then, right outside the hospital main entrance, my Dorothy passed away in my arms. Gone, just like that, 'cause she's sick and couldn't get enough to eat. Now me and Pap got grandbabies to raise. I prayed their future would be brighter. In 1967, Robert Clark, a Freedom Democrat, cracked the door to the State House. He was the first black person elected to the Mississippi legislature since Reconstruction, when slavery had just ended. In 1968, Dr. King and Bobby Kennedy, a senator running for president, were both killed. Those were dark days. No rest. Summer of 1968, I sat at the Democratic National Convention in Chicago as part of the Loyalist delegation, what was formed to crush the Freedom Democrats. Still, I let my voice be heard, for aid to farmers and against the war in Vietnam. I was weary as an old soldier, but I couldn't rest. No, I couldn't. Not as long as blacks was poor, schools was segregated, and black teachers was discriminated against. Not as long as laws be holding women back. One day, an old white man told me he appreciated me doing what he was afraid to do. Ain't no telling how long he wanted change. He could not be free until I was free. I had always believed we serve God by serving our fellow man, and no child should know what hunger is, so I started a freedom farm, a pig bank, and a Head Start program, and I help folks living in shacks get a hold of government housing loans. I mind a lot of pots. I given my 2 cents to the women liberation movement. I won a lawsuit against Sunflower County to integrate the public schools. and I lost a bid for a state senate in 1971. The outcome was rigged against me, but 55 blacks was elected in Mississippi that year, a record for a southern state. And in 1976, the Congressional Black Caucus, made up of black congresspeople, given me a lifelong service award. Maybe I had one after all.
It's amazing how much this one person did for so many people. It's mind-boggling. For black folks, for farmers, children, voters, veterans, the poor. Imagine what the world would look like if everyone stopped being followers and decided to be good. They call that a utopia, which is a fictional place. Unfortunately, there will always be bad in the world. But you gotta speak up against it. Decide to be good. And speaking of good, if you thought this video was good, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. I'm Adam. And I'm Pim. And this is Where There's a Williams, There's a Way.
Author's note. Fannie Lou Hamer, 1917 to 1977, was known as the spirit of, or the voice of the civil rights movement. Perhaps she was both, with her powerful singing and passionate, plain-spoken oratory. The granddaughter of slaves and the youngest of 20 children born to sharecroppers in the Mississippi Delta, Hamer was an unlikely heroine. Born in 1917 in Montgomery County, Mississippi, she had polio as a child and started picking cotton at age 6. Although she was a good student, she dropped out of school in 6th grade to help her family in the field. At home in the field, she grew up listening to African American spirituals. In 1944, Hamer married sharecropper Perry Pap Hamer and moved to the Marlowe plantation. She was unable to have children after surgery that the state ordered for poor women, though Hamer and her husband adopted 2 daughters. At the Marlowe place, Hamer cooked and cleaned in the owner's home. Because she had mathematical skills, she was also tapped to keep time, weigh the cotton, and pay the workers their share. Although the plantation owner rigged the scales to cheat the sharecroppers, Hamer strove to be fair, using her own scale when possible. In the Mississippi Delta, daily life was so grueling and poverty so great that Hamer did not even realize voting was her right until young grassroots organizers mobilized her community. When she tried to register to vote, she not only failed the poll test but also faced backlash from the plantation owner. He fired her and made her move off the plantation without her family. They eventually reunited in a house in town. By then, Hamer was working tirelessly for racial equality. In 1963, after demanding service at a whites-only cafe, she was jailed and brutally beaten in Winona, Mississippi. The injuries plagued her for the rest of her life. Still, she rose from the community activist to become a national spokesperson for the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Hamer spoke at rallies and on college campuses, moving audiences with her booming voice and soulful singing. On the front lines of the freedom struggle, she joined sit-ins, led voter educating training, and marched with Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. She helped form the Mississippi Freedom Democratic Party and addressed the 1964 Democratic National Convention, exposing voter discrimination. Hamer ran 3 times for elected office. Beyond the civil rights movement, Hamer helped start a Head Start preschool program and ran a farm project to reduce hunger in her community. She also led the Cotton Pickers Resistance Movement and co-founded the National Women's Political Caucus. In 1969, Tougaloo College awarded Hamer an honorary doctorate degree, and in 1972, the Mississippi House of Representatives recognized her with a proclamation. She died in 1977. Today, a street, post office, youth center, and memorial park bear Hamer's name in her hometown of Ruleville, Mississippi. Timeline: 1917, May and July, race riots in Tulsa, Oklahoma. August, race riot in Houston, Texas. October 6th, Fannie Lou Townsend is born in Montgomery County, Mississippi. November 10th, 41 suffragists are arrested in front of the White House. December 11th, 13 black soldiers are hanged for participation in the Houston riot. 1918, May 21st, the U.S. House of Representatives passed the 19th Amendment to the Constitution, granting women the right to vote. June 3rd, in Hamer versus Dagenhart, the U.S. Supreme Court rules child labor laws unconstitutional. July, race riots in Philadelphia and Chester, Pennsylvania. 1919, May, race riots in Charleston, South Carolina. July, race riots in Longview, Texas, Washington, D.C., and Chicago. October, race riot in Elaine, Arkansas. 1920, January 4th, the National Negro Baseball League is founded. January 19th, the American Civil Liberties Union is found. February 14th, the League of Women Voters is founded. 1921, June, race riot in Tulsa, Oklahoma. 1923, January 2nd, the Ku Klux Klan attacks black residents of Rosewood, Florida, murdering 8 people. September 15th, Oklahoma declares a state of siege due to the Ku Klux Klan violence. 1925, August 8th, Ku Klux Klan members march in Washington, D.C. 1927, May 2nd, in Buck v. Bell, by a vote of 8-1, the U.S. Supreme Court affirms the constitutionality of Virginia's law allowing state-enforced sterilization. 1929, October 29th, Black Tuesday, the start of the Great Depression. 1933, March 4th, Franklin D. Roosevelt is inaugurated as the 32nd President of the United States. 1936, August, the Olympic Games are held in Nazi Germany. The U.S. brings 312 athletes, including 18 African Americans. African American track and field athlete Jesse Owens wins 4 gold medals. In total, the U.S. wins 24 gold medals, 8 of those by black athletes. 1939, September 3rd, Great Britain, France, and Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, and Canada declare war on Germany. 1940, February 29th, Hattie McDaniel becomes the first black woman to win an Oscar for her portrayal of a slave in the movie adaptation of Gone with the Wind. 1941, December 7th, attack on Pearl Harbor. December 8th, the U.S. enters World War II. 1942, February, race riot in Detroit. March 18th, 2 black baseball players, Jackie Robinson and Nate Moreland, are allowed to work out with the Chicago White Sox after requesting a tryout. 1943, June, race riot in Detroit. August, race riot in Harlem. 1944, Fannie Lou Townsend marries Perry Pap Hamer. 1945, August 6th, atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. 1947, playing for the Brooklyn Dodgers, Jackie Robinson is named Rookie of the Year. 1948, July 22nd, President Harry S. Truman issues an executive order abolishing segregation in the U.S. military. 1954, May 17th, in Brown v. Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas, the U.S. Supreme Court declares school segregation unconstitutional. 1955, December 1st, Rosa Parks is jailed for refusing to move to the back of a bus in Montgomery, Alabama. A year-long boycott follows, lasting until the city's bus segregation ordinance is declared unconstitutional. 1957, September. Arkansas Governor Orville Faubus uses the National Guard to block 9 black students from attending Little Rock High School. President Dwight D. Eisenhower sends in federal troops to allow the black students to enter the school. 1960, February 1st, 4 black college students began sit-ins at the lunch counter in Greensboro, North Carolina, where black patrons are not served. May 6th, the Civil Rights Act of 1960 is signed into law by President Eisenhower. It includes measures against discriminatory voting practices. In 1961, January, race riot at University of Georgia. May 20th, Freedom Riders are attacked by white mobs in Montgomery, Alabama. May 24th, 27 Freedom Riders are arrested in Jackson, Mississippi. August 16th, Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. gives a speech in Florida promoting black voting rights. November 29th, a white mob attacks Freedom Riders at a bus station in Mississippi. December 12th, 700 people, including Martin Luther King Jr., are arrested at a demonstration in Albany, Georgia. While undergoing surgery to remove a small tumor, Fannie Lou Hamer receives a hysterectomy without her consent or prior knowledge. 1962. On April 3rd, the U.S. Department of Defense orders complete integration of military reserve units, excluding the National Guard. August. Fannie Lou Hamer attends her first voter registration event in Louisville, Mississippi. October. President John F. Kennedy sends federal troops to the University of Mississippi to end riots that James Meredith, the school's first black student, can attend. October 16th through October 28th, Cuban Missile Crisis. 1963. Fannie Lou Hamer finally succeeds in registering to vote. June 9th through 12th, Fannie Lou Hamer is arrested and brutally beaten while in police custody. June 10th, President Kennedy signs a law ensuring women and men equal pay for equal work. June 11th, President Kennedy makes a statement declaring segregation morally wrong and calling for legislative action. June 12th, civil rights leader Medgar Evers is assassinated. August 28th, 200,000 people demonstrate in Washington, D.C. for equal rights. Martin Luther King Jr. delivers his I Have a Dream speech at the Lincoln Memorial. September 10th, 20 black students enter desegregated public schools in Alabama. September 15th, a church bombing in Birmingham, Alabama leaves 4 young black girls dead. November 22nd, President Kennedy is assassinated. 1964, Fannie Lou Hamer runs for Congress in the Mississippi State Democratic primary. January 23rd, the 24th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution barring poll taxes in federal elections is ratified. June 19th, after an 83-day filibuster, the U.S. Senate passes the Civil Rights Act of 1964. July 2nd, the Civil Rights Act is signed by President Lyndon B. Johnson. August, race riots across New Jersey and Chicago. August 22nd, in a televised appearance, Fannie Lou Hamer addressed the Democratic National Convention's Credential Committee. October 14th, Martin Luther King Jr. is awarded the Nobel Peace Prize. 1965, Martin Luther King Jr. launches a voter registration drive in Selma, Alabama. February 1st, 700 people, including Martin Luther King Jr., are arrested during a demonstration in Alabama. February 21st, Malcolm X is assassinated. March 8th, the first U.S. ground troops arrive in Vietnam. March 21st through 25th, Martin Luther King Jr. leads a march of 25,000 people from Selma to Montgomery, Alabama. August, race riots, often called the Watts Riot in Los Angeles. August 6th, the Voting Rights Act of 1965, making it illegal to force would-be voters to pass literacy tests, is signed by President Johnson. 1967, August 30th, Thurgood Marshall is confirmed as Supreme Court Justice by the U.S. Senate. Fannie Lou Hamer publishes her autobiography To Praise Our Bridges. 1968, April 4th, Martin Luther King Jr. assassinated in Memphis, Tennessee. April 11th, President Johnson signs the Civil Rights Act of 1968, which prohibits discrimination in the sale, rental, and financing of housing. June 6th, Senator and presidential candidate Robert F. Kennedy is assassinated. 1971, Fannie Lou Hamer runs for the Mississippi State Senate. 1972, Fannie Lou Hamer is recognized in a unanimous resolution by the Mississippi House of Representatives praising her statewide and national contribution to civil rights. 1976, February, the first African American History Month is observed. 1977, March 14th, Fannie Lou Hamer dies. Did you know? On June 11, 1963, President Kennedy announced a bill that would make it illegal to discriminate against someone because of his or her race. President Johnson, who took Kennedy's place, pushed the bill through Congress.